Hello everyone. In today's video, I want to revisit the idea of carbon capture on a large scale. First of all, I'd like to give a thanks to Brandon Hoffman, a young man who built a carbon capture device and referenced me in his video. Thank you very much for the shout out. Also, I spoke with a young man that is planning on creating a business model and using carbon capture ideas as part of his business model for engineering consulting. So, even though we've got great progress in the area of devices to pull carbon from the atmosphere, we're still left with tremendous challenges. And so I've got a list of 9 fundamental things that we have to understand, that we have to know before moving forward and doing carbon capture on a large scale. The list is as follows. Number 1, understanding the problem. Climate change is actually a solution to a problem that humans are creating.
Climate change is the Earth's solution, or nature's solution, to an imbalance in human activity. We think of climate change as a problem, and it may very well be for us, but the Earth itself will persevere. And the symptoms is what we are thinking of when we say climate change. These climate change symptoms are the Earth's way of restoring balance. So you see, the 4 classical elements are actually the 4 states of matter: solids, liquids, gas, and plasma. Humans have sought to expand our energy. And so in so doing, we've released a lot of energy in the form of fire. In the form of plasma, we've released a lot of our operations. So the CO2 goes into the air, and some of it goes into the water, and eventually it works its way into the soil. Now, how does nature do that? Nature uses the power of the sun and the power of the tides and the power of gravity and all the other things to mix around all the 4 elements. So that's what a hurricane is, that's what a tornado is, that's what a flood is, that's what a drought is. These operations that we see in nature are being exacerbated by our activity because nature has to find a way to balance what we've done, which is just done too many things and burned up too much fuel. So nature does what it does and mixes these all around with storms and crazy weather and everything else so that eventually the carbon can get settled back down into the earth.
Number 2, carbon capture is not necessarily a measure of environmental improvement. Number 3, scalability. As a carbon capture operation is scaled up, things may have to change in order for it to actually improve the environment.
Let's look at an example of how scalability can change the functionality of a carbon neutral process. Let's go for a ride on the 3-wheeler, shall we? Now here's an example of a nice big willow tree. Willow's not the best firewood, but it works for me, you know. And so we have dead branches falling so I can chop up firewood. While I'm at it, let me show you this big cottonwood. Isn't she a beauty? This big tree was planted when I was about 5 years old. Here's a nice wood pile I've started on. And you know, this is an electric chainsaw and I can charge that on solar. So that's pretty carbon neutral. But was it really carbon neutral if I used the 3-wheeler, which runs on gasoline, to drag this up the hill? Well, no, not really. Well, what if I did it manually? Well, gosh, you know, I still have to huff and puff and eat cheeseburgers to be able to carry this stuff around. So it's never really carbon neutral. It's just close to carbon neutral. Now, when winter comes around, I burn the wood in the wood stove and it provides heating. And you can bet I have zero guilt about having a wood fire in January when it's 10 degrees outside. And I'm left with fireplace ash. Throughout the course of the season, I take the fireplace ash and charcoal bits and I put them back out in nature just like that with my hand by hand and with some machinery sometimes. And I just throw it out there into the woods along the trails, and the carbon goes back to the earth. And when it rains on the ash, the potassium picks up carbon from the atmosphere, and the trees grow and everything goes back to neutral. So, while some carbon neutral processes work fine at a smaller scale, if you scale them up, you might run into problems. For example, a handful of people living on a farm with 2 or 3 houses, no problem if you burn wood stoves. But if you have dozens of people in a small area, then you have to change their lifestyle habits. You can still do wood stoves, but you couldn't have each person having their own giant home with one giant wood stove. It would be too inefficient, and you'd end up screwing up nature.
Number 4, spanning multiple industries. Carbon capture will, in the modern world, span multiple industries. And in order for it to function properly in society, multiple companies, corporations, and governments are going to have to work together to come up with plans that actually work.
Here's an example of how a carbon capture process can work from cradle to grave. We'll start at the cradle. This would be a mine that mines, for example, potassium chloride. That's chlorine, not carbon, so there's no carbon in the object that we're pulling from the ground. That's our starting point. We then have to run excavators, transportation, large shipping, secondary shipping, all to run it to the factory where we use electricity to create products, potassium hydroxide and chlorine. Those products can be sold. Only a portion of the potassium hydroxide would then go to shipping, to trains perhaps even, and then to a factory. In this case, the factory pulls natural gas from the ground, produces its own electricity, that is to say a power plant, and a mixture of potassium hydroxide and water is sprayed into the exhaust tower, which reduces the CO2, and then we're creating a secondary product, which would be potassium carbonate, and now we have potassium and carbon, and we can sell that as fertilizer. And so where does it go? It goes, let's say it goes to Arkansas in the forests where we have sandy soil, and perhaps an area had been utilized, and the timber industry had maybe stripped the soil, and the chemistry of the soil was not sufficient, and had been rained on and washed away the topsoil. So now we need a potassium supplement and carbon, and we can get that by buying this product, and the trees can grow, the ecosystem can be recharged, and a future harvest of timber can be accommodated. So the cradle here, as we can see, is another country. This could be in Europe, and this mining operation made it all the way to America, where we finally were able to put this material here, which was a salt, change its form and put it into the soil where it can grow trees. Now the trick of it is, in order to get there, everywhere along the way we're burning petroleum. So you see how difficult this is. So that's why I say alternate energy has to be key. Alternate energy has to be key. In this case, this excavator, maybe you can't find anything to run it but diesel. Well, maybe we use biodiesel. And that right there could help make it a more sustainable operation. If there was a war or something like that, at least you could still get biodiesel for this. And maybe transportation, maybe we can go to electric trucks, electric vehicles that can then be charged via solar. Even if the power grid itself were supplemented, with solar, that would help offset the energy carbon emissions there. Shipping, this is probably diesel for the foreseeable future. But you see what I'm saying here. As we go through this system, if we can find ways to incorporate alternate energy that comes from the sun, the wind, gravitational forces, hydroelectric, tidal forces, any of those things that we can use to generate electricity and power this entire operation, that brings us closer to the ultimate goal. And the ultimate goal really is to be free of the trappings of a petroleum economy, where if there's a war and a pipeline gets cut, you're in a jam. We don't want that. We want to have energy independence, regardless of the environmental problems. So keep that in mind. So this factory has to be run on electricity from solar, maybe even nuclear power, whatever is needed to where we can do this in a way that doesn't release more carbon into the atmosphere, which then defeats the purpose. And from cradle to grave, this entire operation, you have to look at the theoretical maximum. For every 3.5 tons of potassium chloride you pull out of the ground, a theoretical of only 1 ton of CO2 can be absorbed. That's theoretical at best. So you have to understand that these entire operations, that's why I say you can't just do carbon capture just for the sake of carbon capture. You have to look at what your end goal is. Why are you doing the thing in the first place? Because if you want to stop carbon emissions, just don't do anything. But if you're going to do something, make it fix things that need fixed. In this case, this salt mine can be turned into a product that'll help these people make money, and it helps us fix our soil problems. And then in the future, we can make money on the timber harvest and help the environment while we're doing it. So that's the goal. This is just one example. There are many other examples. There's cycles where you can use calcium carbonate and use limestone and solar thermal heating, solar powered furnaces, and magnesium is another element. There's many ways to do this. This is just one example.
So number 5 is to use alternate energy wherever we can. Alternate energy is mandatory in carbon capture. If you're burning more petroleum to capture more petroleum back into the ground, it defeats the purpose. So alternate energy is going to be key in this operation. Number 6, allegiance with the plant kingdom. It is in the nature of human beings to emit carbon dioxide. As animals, this is what our bodies do. It is very difficult for us to conceive of or in any practical way pull carbon back to the earth. However, plants and the plant kingdom are designed and equipped to do so, so we must be allies with the plant kingdom. Number 7, planetary scale soil and water improvements. Now, when it comes to planetary scale management, there's a lot of issues with that. But the management and improvement of soil quality and water quality around the planet is something we're going to have to look at as we go into the future. The definition of improvement for many people is building a structure that people can live in. So I'm not talking about that kind of improvement. I'm talking about an improvement to the chemistry of the soil and water that provides health and life for all living creatures. Okay? Number 8, a carbon capture device is only viable if it solves other needs for society besides carbon capture. Again, the reason for this being, the simplest way to limit carbon emissions from human activity is to just not have the human activity. Well, we can't do that. We're not human beings, we're human doings. Wait, what? We should be human beings, but because of the modern psychology and the way energy moves through this world, people are doing things all the time for money. So if we're going to do things for money, we have to keep moving. And so therefore, any of these carbon capture devices have to integrate into that system and solve other problems. Otherwise, it's not really worth doing, because you could just do nothing to solve the carbon emission problem. Just stop doing things. And last but not least, number 9. The purpose of carbon capture is to achieve the goal of protecting life, plants, animals, fungi, and the whole ecosystem as a whole. You have to understand that the planet itself will survive, but the living creatures on it, well, they may struggle, and ecosystems may struggle from place to place. So this is the primary goal, is to protect that. And if a carbon capture device requires chopping down rainforest just to put more carbon back in the ground, you've defeated the purpose of carbon capture. So let's be sure to keep the final goal in mind, which is protecting all of the life on planet Earth.
So in conclusion, I hope these 9 items give you some guidelines as to how you might proceed when creating a carbon capture device. Thank you very much.